Hi everyone, it's Amy. Here we are at the end of another week. Going forward, I want to introduce you to some words. So this module and in the future, when we're talking about relapse prevention and all these other things, it's going to make better sense to you. Some of these words I've already used when we were discussing the deviant offense cycle and when I introduced you to the relapse prevention model. All right, so the first one is abstinence. We've already really discussed this. As I said, normally when we talk about abstinence, we refer to not having sex. But for our purposes, it's really anything that you should refrain from doing. Fill in the blank. I will not, whatever. It's any prohibited behavior. For sex offenders, it might be looking at pornography, it might be having deviant fantasies, etc. All right, AVE, which was the abstinence violation effect. We talked about this in the relapse prevention model. This is a variety of changes in your beliefs and your behaviors when you have a lapse. If you get sucked into the AVE once you have a lapse by perceiving yourself as a failure or being weak, you will get closer to relapsing. You need to cope with your lapses, avoiding all the negatives in the AVE. And first and foremost, understand that lapses will occur, and they are not relapses. Two different things, all right? Adaptive coping responses. This was also in our relapse prevention model. These are thoughts and feelings and behaviors that change in dealing with high-risk factors or with a lapse. Two different kinds. One is a general coping response, and this enhances your quality of life. This is anger management or stress management or a change in your lifestyle, some intervention there. These are general problem-solving procedures, coping responses, general ones. Then there is the specific coping responses. Now this has to do with dealing with more, as it says, more specific things in dealing with a lapse or high-risk factors, like stimulus control, escape, avoidance, things that are very specific to certain risks, certain situations, specifically. Okay, cognitive distortion. This is a thinking error or a rationalization used by sex offenders or anybody who is trying to justify some kind of abusive emotions or behaviors. These are self-generated excuses. All right, disinhibitors. Sometimes people have a little hard time understanding what a disinhibitor is. Well, first, let's talk about what an inhibitor is. An inhibitor is something that keeps you from exhibiting some kind of undesirable act or behavior, okay? So a disinhibitor is something that removes inhibitions. Alcohol, that's a disinhibitor because it lowers your inhibitions. Having lots of extra cash, which sounds like a nice thing, but it could be a disinhibitor because it could cause you to spend money that you don't have, something you would not normally do, all right? Now let's talk about external supervisory dimension. Now this is the ability for probation officers, parole officers, family, friends, co-workers to monitor your precursors. And remember, we talked about precursors. Those are things that come before a deviant act. They're like the warning signs. Sometimes you wouldn't believe how people know how you're feeling because you do certain things or act a certain way and you don't even realize you're doing it, but they see it, they realize it, okay? So this external supervisory dimension are people on the outside being able to look at you and going, uh-oh, he's heading down the road, he's doing that thing again, all right? High risk factors, we've talked about this a lot. This is something we mention often. This is any set of internal or external stimuli that threatens your self-control. It can be a person, it can be a place, it can be an event, all right? Internal self-management dimension, all right, we have the external. The internal self-management dimension, this is a part of relapse prevention that allows you to recognize your precursors, all right? Now a lapse we've talked about. That's an emotion, a fantasy, a thought, a behavior that is part of your relapse pattern. They are not sex offenses, or they are not any other kind of full-on relapse. They are a precursor. They come before a full relapse. All right? And then there's a lapse contract. Now, you can have this with a friend or a family or a therapist, or in certain circumstances, a parole or probation officer if you're in that situation. And this outlines a consequence for a lapse. All right? Later, I will be giving you an example of a lapse contract. All right, a maladaptive coping response. This is a coping response that is not good. It is maladaptive, and it will bring you closer to a relapse. A good example of this, for example, if you're a sex offender and you're feeling angry and you decide you're going to go for a ride to cool off and you end up at a bar. Okay? That's a maladaptive coping response. Programmed coping responses. This is a coping response that it's a programmed, pre-planned response to certain situations or certain people. These are highly recommended, and we already do this. We already do this in our regular everyday life. I'll give you an example. I'm going to a party, and I know I'm going to run into somebody there who I don't like, so I have a plan in my head as to how I'm going to deal with that person when I see them. All right? That is a programmed coping response. It is pre-planned, highly recommended, so you're not caught off guard. All right? Self-deprecation. This is a very dangerous thing. We talked about it in the abstinence violation effect. It is simply when you put yourself down. And in regard to relapsing, when you're putting yourself down, let's say if you have a lapse, it moves you closer to a relapse. There is no need for self-deprecation for anyone. All right? Seemingly unimportant decisions, we discussed that. We went over that in the relapse prevention model. We use this term a lot. It is a decision that you make that seems outwardly harmless, but it actually brings you closer to a high-risk situation. For example, you decide you're going to go to the mall on the weekend. Harmless, right? Not if you're a child molester. Families with children are more likely to be at the mall on a weekend. So while it seems like a seemingly unimportant decision to go to the mall, it actually is putting you in a very high-risk circumstance. All right, stimulus control. This is changing your personal environment of things that are associated with your relapse pattern. If you're a drinker, get rid of alcohol. If you have pictures on your computer that you know will stimulate you, get rid of them, delete them. If you know watching a certain show or a movie is going to trigger you, don't watch. Stimulus control, this is something that you are 100% in charge of. So, I want to give you some homework. Go back to the Deviant offense cycle. I posted a picture of it on Facebook and on Instagram. Go back to it and make a cycle for yourself. Using that, make a cycle that illustrates your own patterns. All right? You'll learn a lot. Next time, we're going to delve deeper into relapse prevention with some interventions to avoid lapses. But until then, I'm going to need you to subscribe to my channel. All right? Get in touch with me on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. Questions, comments, kind, constructive criticism, anything you want to give me, I'm here for you. And until I see you next time, be well.